This is Suthichai live from Bangkok, and now I'm talking to Jonathan Cheng from the Wall Street Journal in Seoul, right?
Yes.
Yeah. And the latest story from Yonhap is that the U.S. Navy chief is saying in Seoul that the military options on North Korea are real. It's not a joke. It's not an empty threat. What do you make of that?
Well, it's certainly what he should be saying, and it's certainly what he has been told to say. And on a certain level, you have to think that they do have these sorts of plans in mind, simply because the military has to have contingency plans, and they have to have plans for every eventuality. It's just not possible for the U.S. military to be caught off guard and not have any sort of plan. So I do believe him in that sense, but again, it's a question of willingness and whether or not the U.S. would actually want to do that course of action, and I'm not sure that they do.
No, but the warning from the UN Secretary General was also quite scary. It said that the worst possible thing that could happen would be for us all to sleepwalk into a war that might have very dramatic circumstances. That's from the UN Secretary General. So there is the fear that we could just sleepwalk into a war, meaning that, you know, if there are some miscalculations on both sides, or if not enough effort is put into diplomacy, then we could really see a war in the Korean Peninsula.
Yes, and that's a very real concern, and I believe there have been many precedents in history. People point a lot to 1914 and the beginning of World War I, where no country really intended necessarily to get into war, but just the structure of alliances and the way things played out, it led to a war that was devastating and cost the death of millions of people, and that's definitely a danger today.
How does it look like from Seoul today? The latest sort of assessment that what would be the percentage of diplomatic breakthrough, and what would be the percentage of a possible war?
Well, you ask different people and they'll give you different percentages, and of course nobody knows who's right and who's not, because these are, you know, predictions, and it's about the future and their probabilities. But I think most people would tell you that perhaps the chance of war is maybe 1 in 5, and that's very high. That's higher than it has been in the past, perhaps, and that's higher than many people would think is acceptable. And from there, I think the chance of muddling through with some sort of a relation between the sanctions and pressure and trying to reach out on some sort of engagement, I think that that's probably the greatest percentage. In other words, what we saw in 2017, things get scary, but we don't ever go over the edge of war. I think that's the base case scenario. And there is a very small scenario that we get some big deal between Donald Trump and Kim Jong-un, but I would rate that probably 10% at its highest right now. I think that would be what most people might say.
The war game, the war exercise continues from the South Korean side with the United States, right?
Yeah, well, there are 3 big ones that they do. They do 2 of them in the spring and 1 in the fall. And then there are smaller exercises throughout the year. Some of them are just the South Korean military. Some are joint exercises. Some of them are preparing civilians to evacuate. Some of them are pure aerial drills. Some of them are, cyber drills. There are all sorts of different ones, but there are 3 major ones throughout the year.
Right. So the loud voice from North Korea about this exercise that must be stopped is not being heeded in South Korea. They will continue with the war games, the war exercises, despite the threat from North Korea that we are going to really hit you hard if you continue with the exercises.
Well, just for a little bit of context, North Korea has been saying that for decades now, and they've never been happy with the exercises. They've never liked them. But I believe with the exception of 1 year in the early 1990s, I believe it may have been 92 or 93, when the exercise was halted, the U.S. and South Korea have gone ahead with the exercises every year, and North Korea hasn't followed through on its threats. So, is it possible that they could begin now? Certainly it is possible, and the situation is definitely different than it was 5 or 10 years ago. But I also wouldn't say that simply because North Korea has made these threats that they are going to follow through on them.
Yeah. Some analysts are saying that with the latest missile test, North Korea may be ready for talks because they have reached to the point where they can claim to be a nuclear power. Is that being accepted in South Korea, that this theory might be possible?
Yes, I do think there are a lot of people who believe that. There are two questions. One is whether or not they really have proven this ability to a point where they feel satisfied. I think many people now in the U.S. intelligence community and in South Korea would say, even if they don't have every technical detail solved, they have enough to have a credible deterrent. But that still may not be enough for North Korea to feel like they have everything they need. So they might not be there. And even if they do get there, it's not 100% clear that they would then say, we're ready to talk. They may want to continue to develop it for other strategic reasons.
Do you read Rex Tillerson's latest statement as a shift in the American policy, saying that we're ready to talk without preconditions, just sit down and talk? We could talk about the weather if you want. Does that, sound like a big story for you?
Well, I'd say I have two reasons to doubt that. One, of course, is that the White House has come out and said that they don't see a new change of policy here, and if that was the interpretation of what Tillerson said, that is incorrect. And the other reason is that I don't believe that I ever saw Tillerson's remarks as being particularly dovish in that regard. He said a lot of things on Monday, and the other things he said were quite hawkish. He did say, for example, that we absolutely cannot accept North Korea as a nuclear state under any circumstances, if only for the one reason of proliferation. And there are many other reasons that you may not want to accept North Korea as a nuclear state, but just on proliferation alone, it is unacceptable. And if the media had focused on that particular angle, then I don't think anyone would have seen it as a big a breakthrough in terms of negotiation. So, first of all, he said dovish things and hawkish things, and then even the dovish interpretation was shot down by the White House. So I don't think it's too much of a big story as far as I'm concerned.
So the headline was wrong then, that Tillerson was...
I think in a certain sense it may have been overplayed, and even if I wasn't certain about that immediately after his speech, I'm feeling much more confident about that after the White House statement.
Yeah, because I saw the headline and then I read the story. Tillerson didn't say anywhere that there were no preconditions. He was just saying,
yes, that's right.
Let's talk. Maybe we can talk, but it didn't mean that he would just sit down and talk without any concession from North Korea at all, right?
Right.
And the fact that Donald Trump has not tweeted on this, does it mean anything to you? Because last time, Trump was very quick to say, waste of time, Tillerson, to talk to North Korea. But this time he has been quite quiet.
Yeah, well, I think that it's been interesting how little he's been tweeting about North Korea lately, because for much of this year, he has weighed in on every twist and turn. But I don't believe he's tweeted on Kim Jong-un in North Korea at least since early November or mid-November, from what I recall. So I don't. Maybe there has been a mention here or there. I can't think of it off the top of my head, but he hasn't been tweeting much about North Korea in the past month. That's for sure.
He has other concerns, mainly domestic.
He has other concerns,
especially the election result in Alabama, right?
That's right, exactly.
The visit to China by President Moon Jae-in, what is the significance of that?
Well, the significance is that the two countries were very close just a few years ago, and then over this missile defense system in South Korea. The two sides have fallen out. So China didn't want South Korea to install this missile defense system from the U.S. They thought it was infringing on their own national security. South Korea said, no, we're installing this because North Korea is a threat. And in fact, China, you ought to do more to control the threat from North Korea, and then we won't need this.
Right.
So that was a real conflict between the two sides. And now that they've had some sort of a deal on this, we now have Moon in Beijing to meet with Xi and to try and repair that relationship. But I think that this trip really underscores how difficult it's going to be to repair it.
Yeah, because the main issue on the installation of THAAD is still there, right, in South Korea?
Yeah, right. That debate has not been resolved. And of course, even though the two sides say that we agree on THAAD, there's considerable distrust on both sides about whether the agreement is really one that both have truly agreed to. And so I do anticipate that this is not the last we've heard of the THAAD issue between the two countries.
No, right, yeah. In South Korea, do they believe that China has exerted enough influence on North Korea so far?
Definitely no consensus on that one. Donald Trump would say, no, they haven't. And certainly there is more that China could do, but the question is whether or not China wants to do it or not. Of course, they can turn off all of the oil, flows to North Korea. Of course, they could do other things that could undermine the North Korean state, but they've long had that ability to do it. But the question is more one of willingness.
When you talk to the people on the street in Seoul, are they worried about the war? Are they worried about?
No, they aren't. No, not at all. I would say that they're more worried than they ever have been, but that still is a very low level of concern when you look at the average person. Many of them don't follow North Korea very closely. Many of them have come to the conclusion that North Korea is never going to make an attack, and they haven't for many decades, and they've threatened it for a long time. Certainly none of the technology that they've developed over the past few years, or none of the technology that they've shown off over the last few years, makes much difference to South Korea. Their ability to launch a missile to the U.S. is one thing, but they've been able to do that to South Korea for decades now, and they haven't done it. So there's no more reason to think they would do it now, goes this line of thinking.
Are the Chinese tourists back in South Korea yet?
Not to the same extent, certainly, than I've seen in the past, but I have noticed more Mandarin speakers on the streets than a few months ago. But again, it's not a whole lot, and it is going to take some time to recover. It's also winter here in Seoul, so it's not the most pleasant time of year to be here. It's very cold.
Yeah. How difficult is it for you as a journalist to follow North Korea from South Korea?
Well, there are obviously big challenges and obstacles because it's not an open country in many ways, and we're not able to go there. We can't ask questions of whoever we want to ask questions of. And the information that they allow out is very, very tightly controlled. So it is difficult, but it's also not impossible. There are many diplomats who are going in and out of North Korea. There are many humanitarian groups, now few of them, especially U.S. ones, but there are humanitarian groups that go in and out. There are satellite images. There are UN and all sorts of different officials. Every time they publish photos in their state media, there are analysts who are looking very closely at them. There are people who are reading all of their statements and who are able to dissect it. So there are ways to get around the obstacles, but the obstacles are still very formidable.
So it's a lot of fun and challenge for you, right?
That's right. Yeah, it is. It's the biggest foreign policy issue perhaps in the world, and for that reason, it's very important.
Yeah. Well, I've been following your tweets closely, and it has been very interesting, very informative, and a lot of fun. So thank you for following North Korea for us all through Twitter. So,
It's my pleasure.
so the best of luck, and let's keep in touch. Thank you.
Okay, yes.
Thank you.
All right, bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Thank you. That's Jonathan Chang of the Wall Street Journal in South Korea. And this is Suthichai Live on Facebook Live. Thank you for checking in. Until the next clip. Thank you.